That's not good.
Uh-oh.
You usually logged in from another device.
No, I didn't.
You've been hacked.
My data tracker's been hacked?
Such a juicy target.
No. I never thought they'd get me there.
That's true.
I can. Do I have that button?
Really?
I can close the whole IAB.
I just had this vision of Tommy late on a Saturday night with a glass of whiskey just hovering over the button.
Exactly. No one ever told me I got that button. All right, I'm sending out to the list.
Yeah, data tracker is still not happy.
Yeah, but at least if people have emailed, they'll be able to get in.
And we can see Yov, and Yov apparently can see us. Yep. Yeah, okay. Good.
I can see you.
We are at time. Should we, before we get started, should we? Well, I guess we can solicit scribes when we get to that slide. Be thinking about that if you would love to take notes for us. All right. Good morning, everyone. Um, Welcome to Ietf 121. This is your first session of the day, and we are happy that you're here with us in the HTTP working group. I mean, you can't check the agenda on Data Tracker, so I mean, who would really know? Okay. This is the note well. If you haven't seen it before, please become familiar with it. This is the conditions under which we participate in the IETF. This may be the first time you're seeing it this week. You may have seen it many times before, but it is important. And then also, just as a reminder, we also have a code of conduct within the IETF, and it's very important in all working groups and this working group that we are treating each other with respect and consideration, and we thank you all for that. All right, now the fun part. We do need a note taker. People who are entering the room now get to be note taken. All right. Oh, Eric, thank you.
Very generous. Thank you.
All right. I don't know if you can get to the normal notes link if data tracker's down, but just take notes somewhere and then we'll upload them later. Thank you. All right, and we have an agenda. So this is what we're going to cover today. So we have 2 days. We'll also be meeting, I believe, at the last session on Thursday. Thursday afternoon. And so we have a mix of our active drafts and other topics across both days. We'll be going through resumable uploads, query methods, and cache groups today. And then we have several new topics that have been brought up on list or related to things we've talked about before. And we'll go through those today. And then on Thursday, we'll cover Connect TCP, the security considerations for HTTP upgrade, which is related to that family of work, and Novary search, and then have a fun discussion about IP geolocation. All right. Any agenda bashing thoughts? Okay. So let's get started with resumable uploads. And would you like me to drive the slides, or do you want to try to drive it from your phone? Okay. If you're on Meet.co, you can ask for permission. Okay. Very good.
Seems to work. Okay, hi everybody. This is the part about resumable uploads, an easy and lightweight topic to start the week. We recently published the draft iteration 05. There's a few changes in it that we agreed on at the last ITF. That's namely that we now allow clients to fetch limits before starting an upload using an options request. We also have added the upload length header as an auxiliary value to indicate the entire length before the upload is started. We also made some few clarifications about how resumable uploads interact with the digest fields from RFC 9530. Some additional clarifications about the limits imposed by the upload limit header, just to make sure that we cover all edge cases there. And we added some guidance for different strategies to create an upload, depending on whatever your application is. With these changes, we believe that the draft is shaping up pretty well, and it's basically feature complete from our point of view. Like, it includes all features that you need to implement resumable uploads, as well as some additional nice to have features depending on your use case or your application. Given that, it's not entirely ready yet. The document is a bit hard to read. Like, it's been growing over the last 2 years organically, and text has been added wherever it was best. So overall, the structure is not that well, and we would like to do a bit of an editorial pass without changing the content, just to make it a bit easier to read, remove some text, maybe add a few texts here and there, structure it a bit around, but not change the content, because we think it's basically complete. Putting the draft aside, we also have a few implementations. On the slide here, we say, what's next? Update implementations and test interruptibility. We actually did that on a weekend at the hackathon. We updated all implementations to the latest draft. We tested interruptibility. And we had this nice, at the hackathon, this nice matrix, and there's a lot of green check marks in it, which is nice. Talking about implementations, we have those currently, like those are the serious ones. There's a client implementation in the URL session API on basically every modern Apple device, I think, and iOS and macOS. That works well. We have a JavaScript client for browsers and Node.js, and maybe also other JavaScript runtimes, and servers in Swift, Go, and .NET, depending on what your application is. And all of them interrupt, all of them work well. So that's really great. So far, this is only in testing environments, but I personally would really like to test this in production environments soon. We've been running a similar protocol in production for a few years at Transloaded, and it works really well. But of course, it might change the slide with the things we do here in resumable uploads. But given that, all of this, we think the draft is shaping up pretty well. I'm not sure how the working group feels about this, about how we can move this forward, given that the editorial pass is done hopefully soon. So yeah, that's one thing I would like to ask the working group. But before that, there's one more thing. This is now a bit of an implementation detail. With resumable uploads, we allow the server to report progress using intermediate responses. That's pretty nice, but it's also a bit of a not really novel idea, but a new approach that one response or one request can trigger an theoretically infinite amount of intermediate responses. And that caused a few problems in our first tests, that suddenly clients didn't expect to receive many, many responses, intermediate responses. Especially Go didn't like it. So after 5 intermediate responses, it crashed and then said, nope, this is it, I don't allow any more, which isn't really how it should be handled. And we got them to change it. And now it works better. You can opt into an unlimited number of intermediate responses. On the one hand side, this is just like an implementation detail in Go. But on the other hand, this might also be a sign of where we're getting into. Like, now that we have a rather new use for intermediate responses, we might run into similar issues soon. So if you know that other clients are behaving similarly, let me know and we can test it up front. Because yeah, that's going to be interesting. But yeah, that's all I have for today. I think the biggest question is, how does the working group feel with moving this forward?
I'll insert myself in queue. I think what you're seeing with that, with what Go did, is not surprising, but I wouldn't want to do more than maybe put some text into the draft saying there's an interoperability concern here because previously this hasn't been exercised. But you know, I don't think we should change the whole approach just because we need to go through a little bit of a period of adjustment. There's nobody in the booth.
Do you want to have that one?
There we go. Awesome.
Oh, there is
Thank you.
Ah.
And we're back. David Skenazi, microphone enthusiast, apparently. All right. Happy Monday. No, I think this is great. I totally believe you. As one of the people who actually wrote that exact bug into our quick stack some number of years ago, it's really easy when you're like, oh yeah, you get the headers and then you send them up and you're done. It wasn't quite the same bug, but we just acted on the first headers. And then when client hits came around, that all blew up and we fixed it. So I think an implementation note is enough. And I think like looking at your interop results, you're in really good shape. And this seems like ready to progress to me.
Ron Gondwana, resumable upload enthusiast. I'm really keen to have this out there. Yeah, go, go, go. I want it. Let's get it deployed.
Go.
Yeah, so just wanted to say that in the same spirit of the Go bug.
We can't hear you, Yov.
Oh.
I see that you should be sending audio, but I'm not hearing it come through in the room. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. So in the same spirit of the Go implementation issues, we recently had some, like with early hints, there are some web exposed metrics that indicate the first interim response header. It's worthwhile that as part of browsers shipping this, we would actually test that we're reporting the first interim header and not the last interim header, because this would be a new concept. So I don't know if this requires an RFC note or just something for implementers to be aware of once they get to it, but that's But otherwise, excited about this. Ship it.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Guoyi Zhang, Apple. So one of the late additions to the draft was the addition of the options headers to detect upload limits. And right now that's a must. And I'm wondering if there are any like concerns about the implementations on the server side, whether like that's possible, feasible on all server implementations to support options and options star.
I think in my experience, I was always able to implement that, but I don't have the viewpoint of every implementation. But if there seems to be a problem that this isn't really achievable in practice, we can also maybe turn it into a should.
Julian? We can't hear you. I think you need to start sending audio, Julian.
I keep being confused about the buttons today. Regarding testing multiple 1xx responses, it would be really helpful if there was a public resource on the web which actually can be used as a test case without having to implement the full upload protocol. So just something you can point your HTTP client to, which starts sending many 1xx and then a final response. So that would also make it easier to raise bug reports for certain libraries like Java.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. We have a public demo server for uploads anyways, and we can implement some endpoint like this. That should be possible. Thank you.
Julian reminds me I could probably hammer something into the cache tests to at least test all the intermediaries pretty easily and give you some results. I'll try and do that.
All right, thank you for the feedback. I'm not sure if this is an appropriate question, but given if we do this editorial pass, is it somewhat reasonable to attend or to look for a lost call soon?
It sounds like we're getting there. I think maybe once people look at the revised draft, then we can make some decisions about that. But it sounds like we're on a pretty positive path. Yeah.
We can talk about it, but
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you all.
I guess
Oh.
we have more.
Oh.
Yeah.
Daryl Miller. I'm just curious about client-side implementations. Do we, I've looked at some of the server-side implementations we have. What is how many client libraries actually expose 1xx to application developers? Are we hoping that as we implement more of these, that will encourage people, or are there plenty of clients out there that do already support this?
In my experience, it's you somewhat enter new territory with it. Most, I think, client libraries, like for example in Go or in Node.js, on Android as well, in Java, you can fetch intermediate responses. You sometimes have a bit of an ugly API, but you can do it. On the web, like in browsers with the fetch API, this is not possible. And I'm not, like, I would like to have intermediate responses exposed there, but I'm not really sure if we can get there. But the protocol is also usable, or like the resumable uploads are also usable without them. So it's not a mandatory thing. You can work around it. So I think it should be, or like this approach is also usable in environments where you don't have the intermediate responses available.
Okay, I guess I'm gonna go have to chase our .NET team and figure out if they support it, because I don't think they do.
Do it.
Lucas. Yeah, I'm going to kick people out of the queue.
Hello, Lucas Pardew. Just one question on the 104 status. It's not currently reserved. I seem to be hearing that this is probably ready for working group last call at some point. But I keep hearing other people talk about, oh, I'd like a 1xx status code, and they pick the first available one and say, oh, I'm going to use 104 too. Is there any way that we could provisionally reserve that for this? Is there any mechanism for that? Does it matter? I don't know.
Yeah, sorry, I think we need to work with the AD to, there is a process for that in some arcane RFC. So pick a 4-digit number and maybe we'll find it. And yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's a reasonable thing. I think we're probably ready for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a feel, but it sounds like something to read up on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay. Great. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you as well.
Oh,
Or
Julian,
Julian,
did
were you going
you
to
want to?
Yeah. Regarding the fetch API, I recall that we opened a ticket, I think when we did the HTTP2 work, where we almost had killed the 1xx code. So I think there is a ticket in fetch, and otherwise I'll open that. And we can mention that to Anne van Keesteren next week, I guess. For Java, I can answer that the Apache HTTP client exposes the 1xx codes, although with a weird API, but it's possible. And the standard Java HTTP client at least accepts these codes, starting with Java 17, but that does not expose the contents of the messages. And of course, it has an open ticket raised by me to do so.
Yeah, thank you for the insights. I think that's a scenery we'll encounter a bit often with the intermediate responses. All right, but thank you all for the feedback.
Great. Thank you. Great progress. Yeah, we are reasonably on time. So next up, the query method.
And just for the early allocation, it appears all you need is working group chair and AD approval.
I've requested slides, but I'm not sure what
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
supposed to
Let me
ask that.
click. There you go. You've been granted.
Query. There we go. All right. So, if query would like to show up. Oh. Yes. Okay. Apparently, it's not enough to select. You also have to confirm your selection. So, the talking about the query method. This is a draft that's been around for quite a long time. I've encountered a few people with responses of, wow, that's still not shipped yet, or are we actually doing this? Yes, we are. So we're trying to fill in this gap between get and post, which are kind of polar opposites on a lot of spectrums. And we want something that sits in the middle that has a lot of the nice properties of get, like being able to use it in zero RTT requests, but it has a body for more complicated requests, like say GraphQL, gRPC, things like that. Major updates since last IETF. We have nailed down what content location and location headers are going to mean in the case of this method. So content location, the server can tell you where you could get these results again sometime in the future. So historical data. Location is where you might redo the query at some point in the future. And they're both optional. The server can decide whether it wants to create or find resources for those or just not mention them, however it wants to handle things. But those are nice shortcuts for certain clients. We have some guidance around generating the URIs for those resources, particularly you don't want them to have sensitive information since URIs are more likely to be logged than bodies are. And we filled in the IANA section because we had this accept query header that we'll talk about in a minute, but it wasn't actually being registered. Oops. So we've got a fairly long list of open issues, but most of them are pretty trivial. So I'm hoping we can knock a bunch of them out in the next couple minutes and be somewhat close to done by the end of this week. The first one is, what do we want a conditional query to mean? The document currently says that you only perform the query if the conditions are true, which is a little weird because how does the client even have the e-tag of the state of your database or know the last modified date of your data? And so the proposal is to perform the query and then evaluate the conditional against that. So check the e-tag of the response to see if the response has changed. Or if your database is able to tell you whether the response has changed over a certain amount of time, then compare that. So if there are agreement or objections, this would be a good time to speak up, or you can just do it on the issue. Okay. Julian and McHugh?
Yeah, so my concern was that we're essentially trying to define the semantics of the conditional query specifically for this method, while for consistency, I would like it to be exactly what the base spec says. So I think we'll need to discuss again why that would be weird and what it means for HTTP in general, if every method can make up the rules what a conditional query actually means, a conditional request. So I'm a bit uncomfortable with the idea that we can change the semantics of that for a specific method. But let's discuss that in the ticket.
Okay. So if you have opinions, please put them on the issue. So the draft currently defines an accept query header, where this is partially for discovery. So if you make a request to a resource as a post that could have been in query, the server can tell you that next time you should use this new query method. I support it. And it can give you a list of media types that it would allow you to send, just like you would know what media type you want to use for a post. There's currently no semantic there to say, I will accept any media type, which might be okay because the server presumably can't handle, submitting a JPEG to a database query or something. It probably has a list of media types that it supports, so that might be okay. And also the format do we want to follow the accept header, which we're modeling after, or do we want to do structured fields, which is the new cool way to do things? We need to pick one and just do it. Again, opinions go on the issue, or if you feel very strongly, speak up now. When we're talking about media types, we want to talk about the semantics of the media type as well, because just knowing that it's JSON doesn't tell you what fields the server is going to be looking for. There's been some request that we actually write down what these semantics might be. I'm not sure that's necessary, because if you compare that to POST, POST is very freeform at the HTTP layer. You're submitting an object with a media type, and it's your API definition that tells you how the server is going to interpret that. So I'm kind of inclined to do nothing here, but there are issues requesting that we do something. So again, opinions welcome. The spec currently says that the cache key for a query is a normalized version of the request body. And I can see from the expression on Martin's face that he understands why that's a problem. Normalization is a really hard thing in certain cases. JSON having had lots of efforts to produce consistent normalization and not being terribly successful all the time. So do we need to nail down what normalization looks like? Do we need to not normalize? Another proposal was let the server normalize, and so define a separate method to say, would you normalize this for me, please, from the client? I'm not enthusiastic about that one, but normalization is hard. So how do we want to land that one? We currently allow direct and indirect responses. So you can either respond with a 200 or 201 to the query and say, here's the thing you asked for, or you can send the location field or the content location, wouldn't be content location in that case. You can do a 3xx and a location field and say, go do a get here to find the answer to your request, which they have different caching implications. There's an additional round trip. The client may want to pick which one the server does or influence it. When does the server want to do them? We don't currently have any guidance on this. We just let the server do either one as is convenient for it. So if we want the client to have a way to express that, we would need to define it. There's been an issue filed saying that we should address how this plays with cores. We don't own cores. I don't think we need to do anything here, but it is an open issue. As I said, there's been a request for a normalized method. We don't plan to do anything with that, but if anyone in the working group thinks that we should, now is the time to speak up and say so. So I have just raced through our current set of open issues. If anyone wants to discuss any of them now, let's do. Otherwise, let's get on the issues list and.
And by now, we mean in the next 1 minute and 53 seconds.
Yes.
Darrell
We
Miller.
have 5 minutes left over from that.
I would like to make a comment on the decision around the syntax of accept query.
Okay.
Please don't not use structured fields. Don't make an exception. Like we're in HTTP API, we're telling everybody you have to use structured fields. Having an exception here from this group would be setting a bad precedent.
Fair enough.
Martin Thompson, I think you probably have an answer to most of these questions in your mind based on how I read your presentation of them. Those are the right answers. Just go ahead and do those things, and we can have a working group last call once it's done. I'd like to see this. I'd like to see this work close out, and I think you're probably on the right track. I've seen how Julian's been responding to issues on the issues list, and likewise for yourself. And most of those are very sensible responses to these things. I think most of these end up with much the same as what you have here, which is close with no action. But +1 to Darrell as well.
Okay. I will go and do as I see fit then. Thank you.
Wait a minute.
The working group just handed full change control back.
No, 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 no.
Okay, thank you.
Lovely. Doing well. So next up we have, cache groups. So this is,
You don't have slides, right?
I don't have slides now. We put cache groups into last call a little while back, and we got some feedback. Did I send my response to Willie yet? I think I did. Not Willie, sorry, Wim. Let's see. I did?
I saw that.
Yeah, sorry, I've been traveling, so. Yeah, I think there's some textual changes I need to make the specification more clear, but I don't see anything that's a showstopper with this. So if anybody else had comments, I think now's the time, because last call, I think, is about done-ish. And especially if people want to express support or lack thereof, that's good. I'm not staring at anyone in particular for any reason. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we have uneven participation from cache vendors. I think those teams are often busy doing other things. So if you know somebody working on an HTTP cache, when we have these specifications fly by, if you can wave them in their face and say, hey, take a look at this. And if it's good, say it's good. If it's awful, say it's awful. If you don't care, say you don't care. Having that kind of information is very useful. But other than that, I don't think there's a lot to discuss here. So any feedback? Kazuho.
Kazuho, what I've heard from my colleagues is that this looks good and it can be implemented.
Okay.
I'm not sure if they will, but so they're fine with the design and how it's being worded.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
Can you or someone else of your colleagues just email that one sentence to the list so I can incorporate it into our last call feedback?
Unfortunately, there are certain rituals we still need to go through.
When I send it to the ADs in the Shepherd write-up, they like to see that someone responded.
Okay, thank you.
Painless.
Next up, so we're now switching from discussion of active drafts to other topics. And first up, we've got Kazuho with incremental HTTP messages. And we're doing well on time.
So can you run the slide, please?
I can run the slides. Yeah.
Good.
So good morning, folks. I'm Kazuho. I'm going to talk about incremental HTTP messages. It's a joint work from us three people, but this presentation, especially the narrative, is purely of my own. So next, please. So what are HTTP messages? I mean, are they transferred incrementally? The draft says that, the semantics RFC says that the senders and recipients cannot rely on incremental delivery of partial messages, since some intermediaries will buffer or delay message forwarding for the sake of network efficiency, security checks, or content transformations. But some applications do rely on or assume that there's incremental delivery. Server-side events, gRPC streaming, resumable uploads, or chunked HTTP. These are the examples that either rely or at least assume that incremental delivery is available. Otherwise, it stops working or the benefits being provided becomes greatly diminished. Next, please. And they work. They work pretty much well. Next, please. Until buffering intermediaries appear on the path. And this is a problem because it's only way after you've implemented it that you find out that it doesn't work. So you go to the intermediary operators. Next, please. And they tell you that incremental delivery isn't guaranteed. Next, please. But I need it because I implemented it. It's working for me. Next, please. You're not using HTTP correctly. Next, please. Just do it. Next, please. And it's like, next time, follow the semantics. Next, please. So as you can see, applications might pursue intermediary operators to update the config. Next, please. In fact, it's often just a config. This is a documentation of Nginx that says that while buffering is on by default, you can turn it off by flipping this setting. Next, please. So you can turn it off, but intermediaries still prefer not to unless required, because as said, there are security, efficiency, flexibility reasons to not forward incrementally by default. And one of the examples here is the Flores attack that attacks the concurrency limit of application servers. So for intermediaries, it makes perfect sense to buffer or serialize the HTTP request to reduce concurrency. Next, please. So in short, we are in a lose-lose situation where some applications want incremental behavior because it makes the design much more simpler. But intermediaries don't want to provide incremental by default. So as a result, we are seeing interoperability issues each time such application is being deployed. And it either requires redesign of the application, which becomes more complex, or a config change at the intermediary. Next, please. So can we do better? Next, please. Our proposal here is to do it better by including a signal in the HTTP messages being sent. In short, we add a header field called incremental to HTTP messages for which the sender wants to have incremental delivery. Then intermediaries can recognize this header field and either forward the messages incrementally as indicated, or refuse with an error message saying that, no, I can't do incremental. And the reason for sending an error response rather than buffering is that if you buffer it, the behavior becomes real, like timeouts, or and then you have to, the application developer and proxy developers have to look into the log and see what's going on. So it takes time. But if you have explicit error messages, then it makes clear what to do next. Either turn on, change the setting, or just stop doing it. Next, please. And as you can see, the situation becomes a win-win because as the intermediaries support the new signal and start doing incremental forwarding for the messages that need incremental delivery, they will have less interoperability issues. And applications, therefore, can start relying on incremental delivery more. And intermediaries no longer need manual config changes, so it's a win for the proxy operators as well. Next, please. So are there any thoughts? Thank you.
We have Ted Hardy.
Ted Hardy, explicit signal enthusiast. So I'm very much in favor of this approach, but I think you might want to consider whether you have a third state. So in sending the signal, I would suggest that you have two states, one of which is fail and one of which is warn, so that in the signal you can say, hey, if this doesn't work, I want it to fail. And the other is, if this doesn't work, I want you to warn me that it didn't work. Because there are definitely cases here where incremental delivery is a desirable property, but its failure is not a failure condition of the actual full application. So if you can distinguish with those and use a single signal, sorry, I think that would be a valuable addition. But in general, I think this is a great idea. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yaroslav.
Yaroslav, incremental upload things enthusiast. Yes, it's a real issue in multiple environments. And to build up on a previous comment, most intermediaries don't do some kind of buffering. They prevent incremental things, not because they are evil, just because they try to do some important work. So instead of just erroring out, it might be a good idea to signal back to the initiator saying that, sorry, but no, I cannot do that. And then let initiator decide what to do in this situation. either go from streaming to some other technique or fail gracefully, choose another channel, invoke some application logic, whatever. So instead of having two flags such as mandatory and desirable, still have one. I would like to do kind of streaming signal, but let intermediary, instead of airing out, signaling that sorry, I cannot allow that, and then let initiator do either explicit error or change its logic.
Thank you.
Alan?
Alan Frindell from Meta. I'm an incremental intermediary enthusiast. We stopped buffering any kind of post bodies like a decade ago because it just wasn't scalable for us. And there's a couple of things that fall out as an intermediary developer when you do that people might need to be prepared for, which often has to do with when you send part of the post body up and then the back end will decide that it's going away, but then the intermediary no longer has the post body to deal with anymore. So it has to fail all the way back to the client. So there's a draft I made years ago for something that we have, which is called partial post replay, which when a server is going away, it will give unused post body back to the intermediary, which can re-forward to a different backend. That's one potential thing you may need. The other one has to do with interaction with go away, where you send a post body and then the server gives you a go away. And to prevent that same sort of running out of body, that's one thing we use double go away for. So send a warning go away to make sure there are no in-flight partial requests for a period of time. Then we send the go away with the actual thing to prevent this case where you have to go all the way back to the client to get the post body to resend. But otherwise, big fan of the work.
Thank you.
Alessandro Ghedini, Cloudflare. So we've definitely had the same problem. We fixed the problem on a sort of per application way, like, oh, it's gRPC, so don't buffer, or a customer complains, so don't buffer for that customer. So having an explicit signal would definitely help. We've seen cases where we'd want to disable buffering for things like normal web traffic, like browser traffic. And I imagine browsers are not actually going to set this parameter, right? So I wonder, are there maybe other ways to also signal the incremental? It might be that it's not as something that we do here, but then it might be useful to maybe think about it.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I had added myself in queues, or just as a co-author, but individual. So I heard discussion about how we handle the error states, and he's like, is it a reject? Is it a warn? And Kazuo, correct me if I remember incorrectly, but my impression is that, and I don't think we talked about this here, this signal is sent both on the request and the response. Like, it is an independent signal from the sender through the intermediary. So I think when we're thinking about those error cases, we do need to consider the server sending it, because they're not going to get the status code rejection. So I don't think we talk about that, but like, if we're talking about, oh, it's a soft failure, hard failure, is that only applying to one direction, or do we need to have special considerations for the other direction? How does that occur? Or if we assume that the client was able to do a successful non-rejected intermediary transaction to say this is incremental, does an intermediary get to reject it from the server, or does it have to say, if I accept it to be incremental in one direction, I should support it being incremental in both directions?
Right. So we do have a freedom of choosing which design we like in that question. We usually started with a bidirect, with a signal that controls bidirectional, but we then changed to attaching the signal to each HTTP message, meaning that the request and the response have different signals attached. I mean, using the same header, but it only applies to one direction. But as Tommy pointed out, the response, if you want to stream the response, the signal cannot be seen by, the server cannot observe if the proxy rejected doing incremental. it can convert it to a error response to the client, but the server doesn't have the visibility. So I think Lucas and Martin had proposals to send that signal to the server. I mean, include the client, the intent to receive an incremental response, and then let the intermediaries transform that to a signal if it can obey to that signal, and then let the server determine if it should continue processing. So there are several ways to go forward.
Yeah. And just from my perspective, yeah, there are a lot of different aspects of this that I think need digging into. That's one example. Another is that a lot of the devices that cause problems here are things like virus scanners, both in endpoints and on path, and they are not going to be as well, engaged in these kind of protocols. I think there's maybe a discussion to be had about, well, part of it is signals from the server or the client to the intermediaries. Maybe we should invert that and look at the other direction as well to complement that. But generally, we have talked about this as a community a number of times over the years, for many years since the working group started, I'd say. And every time it comes up, we kind of decide not to do it because like, well, we can't make it perfect. We can't solve every case here. I think that maybe what we're hearing is it's worth trying and seeing how far we can get, especially if we can try and engage those parties which are or maybe more reluctant implementers like the virus scanner folks. So I'm hearing a lot of positivity, which is good.
So Martin Thompson, I think the question about reciprocals on this one, what the client says about what the server might do, I think is an interesting one for us to explore. I think to Alessandra's question, would browsers be setting this field? Probably not, because we're making lots of small requests typically, and we don't really care about incremental delivery of the uploads that we do necessarily, because that's just something that the intermediaries and servers will just deal with appropriately. But I do think that there is a use case for the reciprocal coming back on the requests, because if we're making HTML queries, we often are in a position where incremental delivery would improve the performance of the page load. Whereas my understanding is that our CSS rendering is typically all in one job, and so we wouldn't necessarily put the incremental request on something like that. So our performance people would be interested in being able to get in there and poke at things and make some changes there as well. I don't know what that does to intermediaries who maybe were thinking that this was only going to be used in a couple of niche use cases, and now they have to think about having it used at scale for, say, big stuff like HTML. But that's something to sort of think about through the process here. But my name's on the draft. I think this is worth doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So that takes us to the HTTP wrap-up capsule with Lucas. We should have made wrap-up last, but we're not that.
Are you gonna try?
I'll try.
Okay. I will let you try.
Yeah. Oh, I need to. Yes. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Lucas. I'm presenting on behalf of David and myself on the wrap-up capsule. If you were at the last Ietf, you'll remember that we presented. Well, I didn't. David did. So we're trying to share the pain this time around. There shouldn't be much new in this presentation if you were there, but it's kind of just a recap, a wrap-up of what we talked about last time, and just a little bit more kind of insight into some of the discussion that's happened in the meantime, and whether maybe this group would like to take the work on to do this thing. So rather than focus immediately on some of the use cases that we have that we would like to solve, some of the discussion has been about go away. Alan just talked about it then, but we have this mechanism in H2 and H3 to signal a graceful closure of a thing, of a connection. Which is fine, but it's all a bit of a sledgehammer. There can be good reasons why is more likely as an intermediary operator than anything. You want to be able to shut down an individual flow more than the connection to your client. what happens is when you send a go away and the client receives it, you're effectively inhibiting new requests on that connection, but allow other ones to continue. And there's all complicated stuff around the stream IDs and posts and blah, blah, blah. But effectively, you're telling the client, you can't use this connection to do any new work, but you can continue doing the existing work. And it's okay, but there's several types of deployment where if you have a chain of proxies, there's not necessarily a one-to-one mapping between how the requests on one connection go to another one. You can do aggregation or fan out, et cetera, and if you have the luxury of a chain of proxies that are using H2 or H3, it doesn't always make sense to carry across the go-aways from one connection to another. And the main reason we care about this stuff is that there are real needs like maintenance or access control or other policies that you might want to gracefully start terminating something. And if you just use go away, it's a sledgehammer, and it doesn't fit the kind of way we're just seeing with the incremental flag, like getting more on a per resource based management of things rather than as a server block in total. But to put this into more concrete terms, we'll go back to the mask example that David talked about last time. For those not familiar with mask, I won't go into all of it because it's boring, but I'm an enthusiast and I love it. So very simply what we have are 3 blocks here: the client, the mask proxy, and 2 origins. So that's 4 blocks, sorry. We have a HTTP3 connection between the client and the proxy, which can carry different requests. So we have 2 examples here: connect UDP and connect or connect TCP, which are an indication from the client to the proxy to open up a UDP or TCP socket to 2 different origins. So this is a single HTTP3 connection with a single client and proxy instance doing 2 different things, 2 different completely unrelated things. Within those flows of UDP and TCP packets is an end-to-end HTTP connection, which we have multiplexing, so it's going to be doing loads of stuff. And there could be a reason, in the deployment I'm aware of at Cloudflare, that hop between the proxy and origin is actually a chain of other stuff. And there could be reasons why that needs to be tidied up, a service restart, for example. But maybe it only affects the UDP sockets. Maybe we've run out of ephemeral sockets and we just want to do some housekeeping or something. So we want to be able to break one thing on the back end without tearing down the entirety of the front end. It's a completely fine connection. There's a lot of stuff going on there. We've got a congestion window that's fully up to size, and there's always a cost of re-establishing things. But there's also an opportunity from that, because one of the reasons you might want to close one of these back-end connections to the origin is to kind of force the client to resync or recreate a new session. Maybe provide some new auth credentials or new resource request to kind of fit them back into other things. But that's besides the point. There's various reasons why you might want to do this, is the point I'm trying to say. And the proxy is quite limited in this use case. So say this dark blue band in the middle, the end-to-end HTTP3 connection. The proxy can't inject anything into that. It's just shuffling bytes opaquely. It is HTTP aware proxy, but it can't see or inject anything into there because it's not aware of the keying material. So it can't do something like a go away for that end-to-end connection. It can't indicate to the client there that I want to tidy up just this little individual item. If it sent go away on the front end connection to the client, like I said earlier, it's going to prevent use of this perfectly fine connection for new requests. New tunnels are going to have to go to another new connection, maybe to this proxy or maybe not. Maybe that is something that they want to do for different lifecycle management of the proxy, but it's a sledgehammer and it probably doesn't suit the use case that we have for this smaller individual flow management. And of course, you can always just kill stuff in flight, nix it. But that's very disruptive. And it's more disruptive the more things that are going on within that end-to-end connection, especially if you're not even aware of what those things are. So if you're just going to terminate a large upload of a video of Alan's cats, that's damaging. It can be hurtful. David's talked about cases, particularly where proxied requests and some user agents get managed very ungracefully. Maybe won't get retried. It's client specific, but yes. And we're not saying that you wouldn't ever do this, but having a way to signal that you do want to tidy up, to at least give the client an opportunity to do something, to then back that up with a forceful close afterwards, once you've had enough of them, it's fine. And so the proposal here is a wrap-up capsule that the proxy can send a signal to the client within this connect UDP context. So it's specific to the flow of information that you want to tidy up, to kind of trigger a graceful drain of that end-to-end context or connection that it knows nothing about. And we're talking connect UDP here. It could be any other capsule protocol using request. We don't have that many yet, but I'm planning for the long term and job security. So talk about this wrap-up capsule. There's not that much more to say. It's simple. It doesn't even have a payload. It's just a type. So you send the message and you deal with it. I don't think we'd ever want a payload. There's always people would like a reason in there, a code or a phrase or something, but that just complicates designs in my opinion, at least. But the model here is the proxy would send the wrap-up on the stream that is using the capsule protocol. We use UDP there. We could be connect TCP or IP. When the client receives that, it starts wrapping up. It's pretty simple. Stop using that to make new requests over that channel, or go and open a new one, maybe go and speak to a proxy. You could have very implementation-specific behavior based on receiving these signals. We don't care in this draft about that. We just need that signal because we're lacking it right now. There has been some discussion since the last IETF. Should we allow clients to send the wrap-up as well? There's language that says they must not, and if they do, blow up the connection. But maybe there is sufficient enough of a problem that's different than the mass case we've been talking about, that we could add it. It's simple, like it's not any harder to send it or allow it, but allowing stuff when there's no real concrete use case is not very good protocol design either. So I think personally, I'm probably more open to that. Like it seems fine to me. I know David's got some differences of things, but really it's like, this is a great topic that if this were to be adopted, we could have as a discussion within the working group and come up with some kind of design decision there. So this is the last slide. Are we ready for adoption? I mean, are we even allowed to make that adoption call? Like the authors think this addresses concrete problems. There's lots of design detail. I've got like crazy ideas that we could evolve this into. I didn't want to do any of that here because that risks complicating the proposal and the use cases. Keep it simple. This could be done fairly quickly, in our opinion. And that's it. We don't need the backup unless we do. Any thoughts, questions, support?
Queue up.
Alan Frindell, I am supportive of this work. I think it's useful. I think I have not read the recent version of the draft, but it's probably ready for adoption. I, like Lucas, have some crazy ideas what we could do with it. I'm a client-side wrapping up enthusiast as well, but it doesn't need to be decided now.
Mike Bishop, Akamai. I am also supportive of this. I think it serves a good use case because the intermediary, and effectively this is a go away on the interconnection that the intermediary doesn't have access to send. So it can relay the go away to one of the parties that is allowed to. I'm having trouble seeing the client use case, but I will believe my peers that there are such cases, and I look forward to hearing about them.
Yaroslav.
Yaroslav, wrap it up enthusiast. I am very supportive of this work. I think that's a big missing piece, though I would ask to consider, so I mean, fundamentally, there are two use cases for this. One, when you are having some kind of maintenance and you'd like a client to load balance to a different proxy by issuing a next request. So you'd like a client to retry as transparently to the end user as possible. And second one, when you're just shutting things down and you don't want the client to retry. You want the client to receive some kind of notification that, yeah, service is down, or you need to authenticate or submit a payment or whatever it happens to be. So I don't want to overcomplicate things, but it feels to me that just maybe retry bit as a payload wouldn't hurt. But even without it, this is super useful addition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have things along the lines of what you're saying in mind for like internal use cases between proxies, a signal, like just this thing just close. But yeah, I think we can iterate on that, and it's not anything that would need to be fleshed out before this working group is picking up the work, in my opinion.
Kazuhoku, +1 to adopt, and I also agree that we can decide if we need client generated signals after adopting this.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other feedback, thoughts? Seems like good interest, support. So good to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Cheers.
Anything, David?
Well, before we move on, are you going to start an adoption call? What do you think are next steps
Mark
here?
and I will talk. I mean, I think it sounds like we have good support. So we'll need to stage of things that it sounds like we may be interested in adopting, kind of schedule those in. But
sounds good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Okay. I'll try and do the next one.
All right. So granted.
Hi everyone, I'm Lucas. I'm back.
It's like you never left.
Yes. Yes. I didn't copy paste the slides and almost leave other stuff in and relate it. So we talked about extending capsules, or at least creating capsules that are an extension of the capsule protocol or whatever. In the process of this work, but in other things, in other related working groups, say web transport, etc., we've realized that we have this protocol, RFC 9297, that defined the capsule protocol. That was published back in August 2022. Its initial use cases was focused on datagram capsules. The draft itself is HTTP datagrams and the capsule protocol. And this was a way that we could have proper, unreliable messages if you use HTTP3 and Quick, because you could use Quick's datagram mechanism. But if you didn't have that, there was a fallback you could have of these capsules on a reliable request stream. And although we tried our best to define the capsule protocol in a very generic way, I think we succeeded. But some of the language or some of the design elements were quite focused on datagrams. And as we've had these other use cases emerging and using these things, I think we started to see just a few minor gaps that exist when you exercise the draft. One of those things is unknown capsule types. There's a language in the RFC 9297 that says endpoints that receive a capsule with an unknown capsule type must silently drop that capsule and skip over it to parse the next one. This is kind of like frames, if you're familiar with those in HTTP land, that, you know, ignoring unknown things is good for future evolvability of protocols, because you don't blow up when someone tries to do something that's maybe been standardized fairly recently and you don't support it. However, what the term endpoint there is a bit nebulous, insofar as when we first did datagrams, we only really had the connect UDP case in mind, and it was all fine. But then we've had the connect IP case come in that has additional capsules for registering addresses and all sorts of other stuff. And so the use of the capsule protocol is effectively negotiated on a per request basis using various negotiation mechanisms, which I'll come on to the next one. But you might have a different upgrade token that literally says connect UDP or connect IP. And the capsules that you're allowed to use on those different capsule protocol contexts are different depending on which one you're implementing. So as a server that supports both UDP and IP, you do know about both of those capsule types. But if you ignore the one that doesn't make sense in the context, so if you receive connect IP oriented capsules on the connect UDP stream, that seems like an error to me. the language in the spec isn't clear enough to say if it is or not. And I'm not happy with leaving it that way, because this could cause interop issues. If I use one privacy proxy vendor and I want to switch to another one and they handle it slightly different, sure, maybe my client code is wrong, but it just kind of sucks. So what I would be looking for is some improved language there. I don't have something immediately that I think is the right answer. So the draft that I have, extensibility guidance, just highlights this as an issue. And I'll be seeking input into what is maybe the best way to reframe that text. So that's the first issue. The second one is negotiating the usage of new types. So as I just said, silently dropping these things is good. However, some use cases that could exist do benefit from active negotiation. The draft just goes through some examples. I think RFC 9297 says you might like negotiation, but doesn't provide any help on how you could do that. And there's many options, and some of them have different benefits or constraints than others. So because the capsule protocol is end-to-end, settings isn't really suitable because it's a hop-by-hop based thing. So just explain that. If you've got intermediaries in the mix, maybe you care about them, maybe you don't. But don't trust them if you think that's going to help you to do that. So effectively, unless you really know you're not going to have intermediaries, you probably shouldn't use settings for anything like this. We can use upgrade tokens, and you can do really clever stuff with HTTP 1.1. You could send a range of them and then use the server's response to say, I've negotiated the kind of the mix of things that I want, but that doesn't work for H2 and H3. And there's some text in the spec that says, well, you could kind of make 3 concurrent requests that try to do a capsule protocol decision, and based on which one returns to 200, kill the other ones off. Or it's a design you could do, but I don't like it either. And that you could use headers, and you always have an option to do that, but there's also some caveats. Again, this is just guidance. It's nothing overly specific. I'd be looking for input, but I think the text that I have is a good survey of that environment. And then the last one is error codes, one of my favorite topics. I'm an enthusiast. In 9297, we defined this H3 datagram error, but really that was for datagrams in HTTP3. It says underneath, it's like, oh, if you have a problem with datagram or capsule parsing, this is an applicable error code. But the reality is there's no generic error code. So when we were looking at the wrap-up capsule, it's like, if you're a server and the client sends it to you, that's an error. Send in response a H3 datagram error. And there's no datagrams happening in this simple case. So it gets quite annoying. It can be distracting or confusing, especially when you mix in protocols that are using datagrams too. We have effectively unlimited number of error codes we can have. The solution I'm recommending here is we register generic ones for H2 and H3, like capsule error or capsule protocol no error or something along those lines, but just something to get away. And you'll see this in the web transport drafts as well, using H3 datagram error to indicate non-H3 datagram errors, which I understand why, and the language kind of says you can, but it just feels like an oversight we could fix really quickly and just get it done. And that's basically the end of the slides. Again, an adoption question, but yeah, maybe we discuss first and see.
Yeah. So I'd include myself just as an individual commenting on that last slide about errors. Just another case within Mask, which is using H3 datagrams, but we have cases in the like the quick aware mode where we're using other capsules, and we have now some error cases of like, do you manage the like connection ID index correctly? And like the error is like vaguely related to H3 datagrams, but like the error is not an H3 datagram error. It is a different capsule error. It's like you did your capsules wrong. So I strongly support having better semantics there, because I think on the PR, David was like, this is the best one we have, but we should have a better one. Thank you.
Cool.
Alessandro.
Alessandro Ghedini, Cloudflare. About the ignoring unknown capsules, I imagine the behavior sort of depends on the capsule itself in some cases. So for example, for wrap up, someone in the chain might send it, and then whatever, like if you don't understand it, just ignore it. But in other cases, like, oh, you didn't, you're using, I don't know, connect UDP or whatever, and you're getting connect IP related stuff, then that seems like a problem. But then should each capsule define what to do when that happens?
I don't know is the answer. I could think of like 10 different ways to try and frame this, and they'll upset half of one
So
group or the other.
I mean, the sort of dumb idea is, oh, you have a registry of capsule types, and then you have a column that says ignore or error if you receive it and don't understand or something. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. It sounds complicated, but I'm all for being rigid and forceful in these things to avoid, in 10 years' time, we're like, oh, if only we back then said something. In hindsight, we should have done it that way, just like we kind of are now 2 years later.
The other thing is, so I don't know if this has been discussed before, but speaking of extensibility, and it's a bit orthogonal to this draft maybe, but then should we be greasing capsules? We are. Are we? Yeah. Are you?
Because we are. Just to repeat that at the mic, the spec for capsules recommends greasing and has grease values, and our Chrome's implementation will send grease capsules on web transport, for example. David Skenazy, OG capsule enthusiast. I think this is really important. I think some of these things we really genuinely didn't think of when we built capsules. What about if you receive a connect IP capsule on a connect UDP stream was something we just didn't think of. And then there are other things we were just, flat out lazy, like, oh yeah, datagram error, move on with our life. We have other stuff to do. And I think now that we have some experience with this, like we, have connect IP running here, we have various other things. We're going to be implementing wrap up very soon. I think this is the right time to start. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say we need a BIS on 9297, but at least like this, a guidance on it and some lessons learned. I think this is a really good effort, and I really think we should do it. So I'm fully supportive, and I'm happy to help.
Thank you.
Slide 3, please. Could you go back to slide 3?
This one?
Oh,
3. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Thanks. So I'm a little bit confused here because I think what I was hearing you say as you were talking through this slide is you were not entirely clear on whether the endpoints here included proxies, but the RFC 9297 is actually quite clear on this, right? It says if you're an intermediary and you encounter one of these capsules that you don't understand, you should forward without modification if you support extensibility. If you're the kind of proxy that doesn't love extensibility, and God knows there are a few of those out there in the world, then you just presumably blow it up because you hate progress. But I think what we're saying here is, what does an endpoint mean? If you're going to consume this and you don't understand it, you just skip it over, right? And I actually think from an extensibility perspective, that's still what we want. So I'm happy to have further guidance on it. I think a document that describes that better would be very useful. But I think we probably want to focus on how you determine whether or not the proxy chain is in fact forwarding it unmolested, and the drop is occurring at the endpoint, the server you're talking to or the client that's receiving it, versus the proxy. So I think there's a little bit of a subtlety here that the document would probably want to capture, but I think the core design in 9297 is still right. And I don't want to take up a BIS that's going to change that without some further discussion. Thanks.
I think that's completely valid. Thanks, Ted.
Mike Bishop, echoing what Ted said, I actually don't think this is unclear because there's a difference between unknown capsule, I have no idea what this is, and known capsule type that does not belong on the stream. If you know what it is, it's not unknown, blow up. If you have no idea what it is, it's unknown, move on.
David Skenazy, and to add to that, I think to Ted's point, we were very clear in 1997 about intermediary versus endpoint, as in the endpoint is like that last computer that's either on the client side or on the server side. But then if you drill down to the implementation, is endpoint your HTTP stack, or is it your Connect IP stack or your Connect UDP stack? And then you end up with a little of confusion on what unknown means if you get Connect IP capsules in Connect UDP. So that's the bit we want to fix, not changing the intermediary bit. We would keep that the way it is, or at least that's how I would recommend doing it.
Yeah, so I mean, the implementations I'm familiar with treat capsules effectively as just HTTP body. So it's kind of above some of the HTTP stack that I might even be working on, and they're kind of running in like a CGI script model. So they're not even aware of what other capabilities the server could have. So, but
we do it the other way around, where we parse the capsules all the way down, because that's where we have our quick parser, and there are varants everywhere, and I'm lazy.
And it's about, there's various ways you could do this. I would just want to make sure that the language is crisp enough for anyone who has these kinds of things. And so one of the questions, I guess, I don't want to take any more time, but this is just written as a document that updates RFC 9297 if there's sufficient interest in making some of these improvements. Is an update doc versus a BIS. I don't have any strong opinion. It was just easier to write this standalone to get some discussion going. Any decisions, Chess? Or next steps?
We'll talk about it.
Yeah. You've given us a lot to talk about.
Okay.
Pray you don't give us more to talk about.
All right, Darth Vader.
Okay. All right. I think that's our agenda for the day.
No.
Oh,
we have Yov.
I'm so sorry. Yov. That's right. You still there, Yov?
Yeah, Yov, you're up. And do you want to drive from your end?
I can try. Like, I'm not sure how I can. Oh, what's?
Yeah, here. I've granted you permission, so you should be able to select.
Okay. Let me pick up my slides.
Awesome.
Cool. Awesome. So hey, Yoav Weiss, Shopify. And I wanted to talk to you about cookies a bit and whether or not we can actually delete them. Why? Okay. Essentially, has this ever happened to you? You're on your server and you're encountering various cookies coming in from requests. Those cookies happen to be could be outdated from removed features that no one really cares about, but you don't really have a way to get rid of them. Now, you could say that this is your own fault for some definition of your own, where you should have better set those expiration dates for those cookies. But the problem is that expiration dates and setting them correctly requires predicting the future, and we're not typically very good at that. We could attempt to remove that cookie by setting it to an expired, like an expiration date that happened in the past. But as we defined, we needed a main and a path in order to actually set the right cookie and set it to past expiry. And we don't have that information on the server. So my very simple proposal, or at least I think it's simple, is to add something like delete cookie header with a list of names that will enable us to delete all the cookies that match those names, regardless of the domain or path on which they were set. The open questions I had when I sent the slides are around cookie names, where cookie names are not unique, and this will potentially require deleting multiple cookies. From the use cases I'm aware of, this is not an issue, but I'm wondering if folks think we need better granularity in order to be able to delete some cookies, but not all cookies with that name. Another question that came up on the mailing list is around the scope for deletion. How can the way that I've been thinking about this is essentially if the server can see those cookies, they can already delete them by using the past expiration with the right path and domain. And therefore, with this proposal, it will be able to delete them as well. But folks may have different opinions. And I'd love feedback on that. Beyond that, a couple of questions that came up since I sent over the slides. Cookie lifetime can be or is now limited to 400 days. I'm not sure that applies to all implementations, but it could. But yeah, it could be. And there's an open question on whether we actually need this or roughly 1 year expiration is enough. At least in my experience and for my use case, a year is still a lot for cookies to stick around from past features that miscalculated their expiration dates. And beyond that, I got internal folks telling me that there are various attacks where the ability to where attacks around the cookie confusion, where attackers can add cookies that the server in order to confuse the server with multiple cookies with under the same name, and that the ability to delete those cookies would be useful in those cases. And I'd love opinions on that. Beyond that, there are some questions regarding RFC mechanics, assuming that this is something we want to go ahead with. The Httpbis RFC is almost done. We could try to squeeze that in, but that would be a bit rushing it. Can it live in an independent internet draft until the next round of cookie modifications? What do folks think about that? And yeah, and with that, I'd love y'all's thoughts.
All right, we have Neil.
Hi, this is Neil Jenkins, addressing two of those things. Firstly, deleting multiple cookies with the same name, that's a feature, not a bug. Almost certainly when you end up in that situation, it's because you've messed up, got confused about what options you set for some of the cookies, or someone's doing something silly, and you just want to get rid of all of them. Yeah, I would definitely say that's the right approach there. Regarding the bit of servers getting confused by attackers setting cookies under different subdomains with the same name and that kind of thing, that is an issue. This is not going to solve it, just being able to delete them later. That's where we already have the __host dash hack that the browser will support, which you can only specify those cookies at essentially the same origin, well, the origin of the request, and that lets you make sure that you kind of can avoid those issues. And that's certainly what I would recommend, what we do for cookies that are actually security sensitive. But then you have other ones which are just very basic preferences where wouldn't even really matter even if they could, and those yeah, it's easy to make it easy to delete those is good. So I think this is a good idea, and that's my comments on those two things.
Awesome, thank you.
Yaroslav, cookie eviction enthusiast. So current method of setting a cookie with expiry day into the past, it's clearly an afterthought, but it works. My biggest concern with this proposal is for foreseeable future, implementers would need to do both. to make sure that the cookie is deleted, because there is no way how an endpoint would signal if they support this delete cookie feature or not. So you'll end up setting cookie in the past and deleting cookie at the same time to make sure you are compatible with all the clients and intermediaries. So I'm not entirely sure if that's worth it, given that there is a mechanism that seems to be working today.
So the mechanism works today if you have the domain and path. And essentially, if we always had that, I don't know. I agree that it's not necessarily worth it, but the problem is that in many cases, you don't have it. And what I'm seeing is people starting to encode the domain and path into the cookie in various ways in order to have that information. So it would be good to not need that.
Hello, Neil again. Sorry, one more comment on that. That is a real trouble at the moment we have come into in the past, is that there is no way to get that information back on the server. It's not sent with the cookie. And so if you don't know for whatever reason, because it was set by someone maliciously or because you set it in a way that you don't have record of, it's just impossible to remove it, because you have to find out the magic sequence of what combination of things did I set this with to be able to remove it, and the client won't tell you.
Okay, that looks like that is the full queue. Any other comments, Martin? Yeah, go for it.
It's gotten better, but it still takes a long time.
Yeah, it's
I think the most important question here is what to do with the work. Yeah. And it seems like we've got a cookie revision coming up with some people looking to work through that process. That seems like the right place to do this. Having it integrated in that spec is the pretty obvious thing for me. I don't think this is
in the bis
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like Neil said, this is great. I think that it's the right shape. We don't need to do anything fancy here.
And I think as before when we did how many bises the last round.
Yeah.
We were a little more formal about taking on new functionality. We said you need to do a draft. We need to have a call for adoption and get that consensus to adopt before we put any major new functionality into cookies, because it is a large in-flight piece of machinery. And I think we'll probably do the same thing here.
I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, but I would suggest that this is well within scope, and we should.
It's one of those things that we would consider. Yeah.
As Neil points out, this is just annoying, and it'd be really nice if, when I'm operating my enterprise service, and all of the other enterprise services out there are polluting the 60 kilobytes of cookies they send on every request, I can just delete them all and we'll move on with our lives.
So, Ietf, I guess that's a question for you. Do you have a sense of urgency, or are you going to try and do some prototyping here and some experimentation? What do you see in terms of timeline?
I think this is pretty simple in terms of definition. I also suspect it's not super hard in terms of implementation, but that's an orthogonal story. I guess the main sense of urgency is if we want to get it into this, I can move on getting an ID put together for this rather quickly. If that works for folks. I don't know what the timelines for that to actually get adopted and make it into the BIS. What would that look like?
So to clarify here, we have a current BIS document that is leaving the working group at this point and going off to the ISG. It would not be targeted for that.
Oh, okay.
But we have directly on its heels, we are expecting to be adopting the another BIS of that. So essentially that is a snapshot. And so then we will be doing kind of reopening cookies as we are shipping that one. I think we're talking about targeting inclusion in that. I'm very much hoping that that bis will be a faster process than the last one. We're not going to leave it open for quite as long, ideally. So hopefully this is not, a big delay on getting this to a point, but also, as we are developing something, once a particular piece is stable, we do want to get some implementation experiment. So I think that's okay there. So, but yes, please do publish a write-up of this, but then we would hopefully incorporate it into a larger this effort that would be ongoing and would not have an immediate deadline.
That sounds great.
Okay, great. Okay, we're gonna get this one down to 5 years. So what? It's 11 o'clock. I think we're done for today, unless anybody has anything else on these topics to bring up. But I think we'll see everyone on Thursday. Yeah, yeah. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks for taking notes, Eric.
Yes, very much so. All right, and we're out. Ooh. Yeah.
Zuho, what is new with click on streams? Is it dead?
Well, I want to do it, but anybody can do it. I mean, I think mentioned about how we proceed in this standardization.
Well, I think, I mean, I didn't totally understand why quick came.
No.
But on the other hand, I also don't think it's not quick. It just uses quick's code points. So
right.
I don't think we need quick's blessing to do it. So, and I started implementing Web Transporter for H2 this week, and I haven't looked to see how quick on streams is different. I think it's going to be almost identical, with like ever so slight spelling. Because I started doing it, I just thought like, or like I think about like a TCP fallback from doesn't use HTTP 2.
Right.